Episode 242. Today we are recapping the 2025 NHL trade deadline, some winners, some losers, and just a general overview into what I thought about the trade deadline and how it went. I think it was, and when you look at the teams that won the deadline, I would say it's between two. You could certainly argue Dallas with Mikko Rantanen and acquiring Mikko Rantanen down the stretch for their playoff run and how good of a team they have already and how much better they made their team yesterday. And I would say Florida. Florida Panthers are also in that mix. I would say just because of the pedigree of Mikko Rantanen, the reputation of Mikko Rantanen, I feel like he's a guy that you win the deadline with 10 out of 10 times just because of the ability to be able to create offense in many different ways and how dynamic he is in terms of offensive ability. And you look at how Florida, their acquisitions ever since acquiring Seth Jones, and then they acquired Vitek Vanacek, they got Nico Sturm, they went out and got Brad Marchand for a conditional second round pick, which is an absolute steal. Getting Brad Marchand, just the overall value he provides at his age, and something that is really interesting. I thought Boston would get a little bit more back for him, but it was really impressive to see how aggressive Bill Zito was come this deadline to make his team better, and I think he did that, and I certainly think he rounded his various positions out in terms of D, goaltending, and up front in terms of depth as well. I think Brad Marchand is going to be such a unique player in that system because of obviously his pedigree for one, his playoff performance for two, and then for three, if you put him on a line with, say, Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett, it can annoy almost everybody. And that doesn't even have to be your first line, it could be your second line, which is pretty crazy to think about. So obviously Marchand out week to week right now, and that's going to be something they're going to have to evaluate more long term and see where he fits in the lineup and see how he gels with the team. And it's going to take a little bit more time for him to get integrated with that system and style of play. But I just think when it comes to Brad Marchand, you're getting a player who is just all around consistent, all around unique, all around in terms of personality. And I think you're getting the whole package, and Florida's going to love him. He's going to fit really well in that style of play. He's just going to be a player that fits. And I think you can certainly say that about many players who are acquired come this deadline. But I just think with Boston, or I think when with Florida and Marchand, it's just great fit. And I think those two teams are going to do wonders together. Now, Marchand has another opportunity to win a cup. The one team I was surprised that didn't do much, but they got some players, but they didn't really get much, is New Jersey. I was kind of puzzled at what they were trying to do, especially with their star center out, Jack Hughes. And you go out, you acquire Brian Dumoulin first, and then you acquire Daniel Sprong and Cody Glass. Okay, those are good depth additions, and it would make sense if it was a higher quality team. But with the Devils right now, I'm just kind of confused at where their heads are at. And especially with Jack Hughes out, yes, you can still rely upon a lot of your top six to produce, but Jack Hughes takes away a lot of your scoring inside that top six. So I don't think this hurts the Devils' playoff chances. I think it just hurts them where they could have gone out and acquired a big fish and they didn't, especially with the money that they could have leveraged with Jack Hughes out because they put him on LTIR, so they got some cap relief, $8 million worth. And I just think the acquisitions didn't really make too much sense. I think they could have bettered themselves in just, like I said, going out, acquiring a big name player, and it doesn't even have to be Mikko Rantanen. It could be someone like a Brock Besser or maybe even a Ricard Raquel. I don't think they would go after Ricard Raquel, but just a scoring winger or center that could provide some depth, some value, and someone who you can rely upon come playoff time to sort of fill that void. And again, filling a void for Jack Hughes is really difficult to do, difficult for any player to do. But I think when talking about Hughes, you just need to have something to replace him. You need to have something. And the Devils, it was just puzzling. It was puzzling to me in terms of their thought process behind it. I think they were arguably the biggest, I don't want to say loser because I don't like clarifying losers, but I think in terms of what they did, I think they could have done much better. Yeah, but I don't like really clarifying, oh, who won this and then who lost the deadline. I don't feel like because everybody adds, everybody's making additions, so they're not really losing, right? And you can't really control the Jack Hughes injury, him being out. So I don't think there's really a loser at the trade deadline. I think there's only really winners in the sense of teams are upgrading and teams are trying to round out. And so with that point on, I think talking about Dallas, we have to talk about Dallas and how the Mikko Rantanen acquisition could really make them a threat. We saw how slow of an adjustment he had to Carolina. I don't know if it's going to make any difference, him being back in the Central and in the Western Conference, and him potentially playing with a star center like Wyatt Johnston or something like that. I don't know how it's going to work out. I just think with Mikko Rantanen, you obviously any team that acquires him, they're getting a unique style player that really many teams don't have. And I just find it ironic how, after all of this saga and all the contract talks and everything that surrounded Mikko Rantanen in the last 2 or 3 weeks, even month, he winds up back in the Central and he winds up signing for what he originally could have got in Colorado. So I think that's interesting. Certainly, taxes and state tax could have played a factor here with Dallas versus Colorado, but I think you just look at Mikko Rantanen and you're like, you're kind of puzzled because for one, he could have just stayed in Colorado, he could have stayed put, and none of this would have ever happened. Everybody would have been fine, and it's just interesting to me. I think the the unique thing with Mikko, and I kind of look at it from the perspective now of them trading Marty Necas for Logan Stankoven and 2 first-round picks. Would you still do that if you trade away Martin Necas? Now, I think with that, that becomes a little more interesting. We're talking about Mikko Rantanen here, obviously, but he didn't want to sign in Carolina, and they were probably going to lose him for nothing come free agency. So you can't afford to lose a player like that for free agency. So I understand the move that they had to do. I just, it kind of surprises me looking back how Carolina didn't really think of the extension initially before acquiring Rantanen. Like they could have just kept Necas and he could have signed longer term. And then it's just interesting with Rantanen. And Dallas did the smart move here and they acquired him. And before they acquired him, they wanted an extension in place. Otherwise, they weren't going to acquire him. So that was really smart. And Dallas's end, they get him signed right away, 8 years, 12 million a year. And back the other way, there's I believe four total picks involved, two of which are first rounders, and then Logan Stankoven, who Logan Stankoven is certainly a young player, showcasing a ton of potential, and he's only his the trends in his game are only going up. He's only going to get better with time. He reminds me a little bit of like a Seth Jarvis style player, and I think he'll really resonate very nicely in Carolina. And he'll be a player that will be exciting to watch. I think he'll be a fan favorite there in Carolina based on how he's developing now and how his long-term trajectory will go as well. And then we'll evaluate a few more deals, not too many. I think one interesting one to me, outside of the Dylan Cousins for Josh Norris swap, was Ottawa acquiring Fabian Zetterlund from San Jose. I was really impressed with this move. I was surprised that San Jose would move on from Zetterlund so early on in the rebuilding process. I think he was a type of player. He could have easily given them more over the next few years if he stayed there. Oh, well, it depends also if he really wanted to stay there. But I just think the return they got, like Zach Ostapchuk, Noah Gregor, and a second round pick, I don't necessarily believe that's enough, especially since you acquired Fabian Zetterlund, I believe it was last year for Timo Meyer, and I just find it interesting how that whole thing played out with him. I think Ottawa did really well. Acquiring Dylan Cousins, obviously Dylan Cousins could become a the player that he used to be a few years ago. I think that's an interesting situation to put him in. Ottawa likes to play with a ton of speed, ton of finesse, ton of skill. I think he'll really gel nicely there. Josh Norris hasn't lived up to his full potential yet either because of injuries and the injury issues surrounding him. So that's the risk that Buffalo takes with Norris, but certainly they can get a prominent scorer who I believe almost a few years ago scored around 40 goals. So I think it's a good swap, honestly. It makes a lot of sense for both sides because both players get a change of scenery. And I just like it a little bit more for Ottawa. I think certainly time will tell how this deal plays out, but I like it for Ottawa in the sense of how Cousins can fit there and really gel there over time. And then in terms of one other one was interesting was the Charlie Coyle one for Casey Middlestat, Will Zellers, and a second round pick in 2025. I felt like this was a lot to give up if you're Colorado in acquiring Charlie Coyle. I think they could have gotten more elsewhere, but certainly a player that will provide some depth for them up front. They just acquired Brock Nelson, so they have their second and third line center roles filled out now, which is great for them. I think Coyle coming back to the Central will be a nice fit as well. Him coming back to the Western Conference outside of Minnesota, and it'll be an interesting one to see how that whole situation plays out with him. And the other one I actually really liked was Edmonton getting Jake Wallman. And Jake Wallman having a really good season with San Jose. Ironically, he was acquired from Detroit for future considerations, and he just landed Edmonton a first round pick, which is pretty impressive asset management there. And I think with Jake Wallman, certainly makes sense to trade him right now with the season he's having and the productivity level, the offensive ability, the ability to play a power play. And he also still plays a reliable, even strength defensive game. And I think that's something that was really intriguing for Edmonton, going out and acquiring Matthias Ekholm a few years ago. And then now they get Jake Wallman, somewhat similar. Obviously, Wallman a little bit different, a little bit smaller than Ekholm, but I would say stylistically speaking, just pure style, somewhat similar for sure in terms of puck moving D who can play a two-way game and be reliable at both ends of the rink. I think Jake Wallman provides something that Edmonton needs on their left side, and it'll be a really nice fit there. I think it'll be unique to see how that situation plays out with him on the power play and whatnot, and if his production dips a little bit or not. But certainly a really good trade for Edmonton. I really like it. I think it's going to be something that'll be one of the more interesting trades to evaluate down the stretch of the season just because of how Wallman has played on a very bad team and how he can play and potentially play on a really good team as well.